there was a board game played in Iraq by the Sumerians and the Babylonians. And
was it a king board game? Used to call
yes.
A royal game?
It's sometimes called the Royal Game of Ur.
Royal Game of
because
Ur.
the board was first discovered at the city of Ur in southern Iraq. And it came to light by the archaeologists in royal graves. The queen and the princess and other people had examples of this game because they liked it. And they thought in the world to come, they would also want to play with cups of tea with their nieces and nephews. And so they had them in the grave. And these boards existed with their dice and the pieces. And then a cuneiform tablet in the museum, which was written a very long time afterwards. So the boards were from about 2500 BC, something like that. And this tablet with rules on was written in the 2nd century BC. So a huge period of time afterwards, which showed that the game had been played for a very long time and played on the street and in bars when people were drinking and in houses and so forth. But at the end of the first millennium, there were some scholars who were astronomers. And they knew about the movements of the stars, and they knew about the Zodiac, and they knew about many complicated things. And they had their traditional game that kids and adults have played for 2,500 years.
Okay.
And they made up a special complicated game using the idea of the Zodiac and the movement of the planets. Much more complicated than most people could understand. And this came out of one of these tablets. So the whole history of this thing suddenly was there on the table.
Is there any evidence on tablets, like they explain how they were so good in astronomy? Like seeing the sky and the stars?
There's a great deal of information about astronomy, and it's mostly from the first millennium BC. And there's an important thing about it, which makes it explicable why the scholars and the astronomers in Mesopotamia made so many clever observations and calculations. Because in antiquity, in Iraq, there was no pollution in the air, in the sky, in the night sky. So a normal Babylonian person, when they went to sleep on the roof when it was so hot, they lay back and they looked up at the sky.
And it was all clear.
And it was like a drive-in movie. And I believe that all intelligent people in ancient Mesopotamia knew all about the stars in the sky because they saw them every day. And what happened was that in antiquity, like in the modern world, you have very stupid people. And you have people who are okay and people who are rather clever. And you have geniuses all across. This must have been true all the way through history. And there were people in Babylonia who were really very, very intelligent indeed. And you can imagine, if you're looking up at this marvelous view, and you think, now there's a funny thing. I'm sure that used to be over there.
Yeah.
What's it doing over here? Like that. And all you have to do in the history of science is to have one clever person to see that and then to think, how can that be? How can that be? And they understood, they worked out using mathematical astronomy, the most amazing amount of information about what they could, to explain what they could see with their own eyes. And so it became a big component, some of which passed into the knowledge of the Greeks and informed Greek astronomy and Greek mathematical astronomy, and in fact is still a kind of alive in the world.
Were these discovered in Ashurbanipal's library, like most of these tablets?
Well, a lot of what we know about what the Mesopotamians understood, what was traditional, what they regarded as important, comes from the library of Ashurbanipal, who was this very famous, brilliant, politically clever, military and intelligent, trained intellectual who was the king of Assyria in the 7th century. So he was king of the world and he had money and power and armies and administrators. But when he was a boy, Something fortunate had happened to him because he had a tutor called Balassi. And Balassi was one of these geniuses who was an astronomer, who understood about the movements of the planets and the stars. He understood everything.
Okay.
And he taught Ashurbanipal as a boy to read and write cuneiform, because he was one of the princes and he was going to be king one day, and he would have to be able to read cuneiform and speak properly his own language. So he had this best tutor possible, and he grew up with a deep interest in learning, in words, in meaning, in literature, all those things of an intellectual interest. And because he was such a powerful ruler, he used his position in order to bring tablets, documents to the library, sometimes from down south in Babylonia, in southern Iraq, things from old libraries that they didn't have in Nineveh, and the tablets would come to the capital, and there was a whole chancery, a whole room of top scribes, and when a tablet came in, they would copy it out in the king's beautiful writing for the library, make sure everything was perfect, and they had a kind of system. And sometimes he sent a letter saying, look, we need this, we don't have that, can you find it? And his agents went to what you would think of as university libraries in our world, that's to say, temple libraries, or the libraries of great scholars, private individuals who were teachers and thinkers. And they brought to Nineveh, for the king's library, what was needed. So in the end, he had a library of maybe 25,000 tablets that covered knowledge then, the knowledge of the world then. That was the idea, with the best quality manuscripts, and they had lists of words, lists of numbers, calculations, observations of the heavens, taking omens. They had poetry, they had literature, they had love songs, they had and historical things and administrative things and correspondence, all together in this great compilation, which was at the time probably the first library ever meant to be with everything under a single roof. That was the kind of conception. And it's easy to have an idea like that. And if you're king of Assyria, you can do that. You just tell people to do this and do that. And he obviously paid a lot of attention to the documents himself, because he wasn't like a collector who had them and left them on the shelf. He obviously read them and he checked them, and they signed at the bottom, they belong to the library, no one must take them away. So he was very involved in that.